Tony Stewart is coming back to NASCAR after almost 20 years away, and fans everywhere are excited to see the legend race again. But Kyle Busch just said something in 7 words that completely changes how we should think about this comeback. What Busch shared about NASCAR today is actually pretty scary, even for drivers who have been racing their whole lives. And here's the thing. This has absolutely nothing to do with whether Stewart can still drive or not. But not everyone is rolling out the welcome mat. Kyle Busch, never one to sugarcoat reality, had a message for Stewart that cut straight to the heart of what NASCAR has become. When asked about Stewart's return, Busch delivered a 7-word reality check that should make everyone sit up and pay attention. I hope he doesn't plan on finishing. That might sound harsh at first, but Busch wasn't taking a shot at Stewart's talent or ability. Far from it. What Busch was doing was giving Stewart and everyone else a wake-up call about just how dramatically NASCAR has changed since Stewart last competed in the Truck Series back in 2005. The sport Stewart is stepping back into bears little resemblance to the one he left behind nearly 2 decades ago. Busch knows the Daytona truck race better than most. He's won the season opener in the past and took the checkered flag at Atlanta in the Truck Series just last year. He understands exactly what Stewart is walking into, and it's not pretty. To drive his point home, Busch mentioned a shirt he wore ahead of the 2022 Daytona truck opener. The shirt featured a pile of burning money, and Busch called it the most expensive day of the year for owners. That image tells you everything you need to know about what this race has become. It's chaos, it's unpredictable, and it's going to cost someone a lot of money when the inevitable carnage unfolds. The Daytona Truck Series race has evolved into something that even hardened veterans approach with caution. The competition is fiercer than ever before. The trucks themselves are aerodynamically challenging, especially in dirty air, which makes overtaking messy and high risk. Add in a field full of hungry young drivers who are willing to do whatever it takes to make a name for themselves, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Experience helps, sure. But at Daytona, survival often comes down to luck and being in the right place at the right time. But the problem runs deeper than just one chaotic race at Daytona. What Busch is really talking about is a fundamental shift in how racing is approached in NASCAR today. The culture has changed, and not necessarily for the better. Busch pointed out that young drivers are being taught aggressive tactics from the very beginning of their racing careers. When you watch kids racing in ARCA, late models, and other developmental series, you see it constantly. Dive bombing, door slamming, making contact without thinking twice about the consequences. These aren't occasional tactics used in desperate situations. They're becoming standard operating procedure. Busch explained that these drivers are taught from a very young age to dive bomb and run into other cars, to door their competitors without hesitation. And here's the thing that really bothers him. As a father himself, Busch has heard the excuse, "I had to do it more times than he can count." He's probably even said those words himself once or twice. But the difference is that for the current generation of drivers, this isn't an excuse for a desperate move in a critical moment. It's become the default approach to racing every single week. The generational divide in NASCAR isn't just about age, it's about philosophy, about respect, about understanding what it means to race hard without destroying equipment and ending someone's day. Busch grew up in an era where drivers like Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Tony Stewart, and Mark Martin taught younger competitors about respect on the track. They made it clear that you didn't have to like your fellow drivers, but you had to respect them. You could race hard, you could compete fiercely, but there were lines you didn't cross unless absolutely necessary. That culture of mentorship and mutual respect has largely disappeared. Busch admitted that while his phone number is probably pretty accessible, he rarely gets calls from younger drivers seeking advice or trying to hash things out after incidents on track. The older generation of drivers used to sit people down and have tough conversations. They'd pull you aside after a race and explain why what you did was wrong, why it wouldn't be tolerated, and what the consequences would be if it happened again. Stewart himself did this with Busch years ago. The story goes that during a race at Las Vegas, a young Busch cut off Stewart multiple times in the closing laps. Stewart, never one to back down, tried to retaliate, but ended up fencing himself off turn 2 instead. Busch finished third, while Stewart limped home in 15th or 20th place with a damaged car. But here's where the old-school NASCAR culture kicked in. Stewart didn't just forget about it. He stayed mad for months. Eventually, he called Busch over to his bus for a one-on-one conversation. That meeting turned into a lasting lesson about racing smarter, being more calculated, and understanding that respect prevents recklessness. That advice shaped Busch's career. It taught him valuable lessons that he carried forward. But here's the problem. When Busch looks at today's NASCAR landscape and tries to imagine having that same conversation with current drivers, he realizes it wouldn't work. The entire sport has moved in a different direction. When people ask him why he doesn't take younger drivers under his wing and teach them the way Stewart, Gordon, and Johnson taught him, his response is simple. We are in a completely different era now. Like, there is no fixing what we have got going right now with everybody running over everybody. That's not pessimism. That's reality based on years of experience and frustration. Busch has been on the receiving end of aggressive moves that he believes cross the line. He's watched races in the Xfinity Series and Truck Series devolve into what he calls a clown show, with drivers making excuses after the race for moves that destroyed other people's equipment and ended their days early. He's seen the consequences of a racing culture that prizes short-term aggression over long-term respect and racecraft. The current generation of NASCAR vehicles contributes to this problem as well. The next-gen car and modern trucks struggle in dirty air, which makes clean passing difficult. When you combine cars that are hard to pass with drivers who are willing to use contact as a primary tool, you get racing that's more about surviving than actual competition. The playing field has been leveled to an unprecedented degree through spec parts and vendor requirements, which means cars are closer in performance than ever before. NASCAR's return to the chase format in 2026 has sparked optimism among some fans and competitors who believe it will reduce desperation moves and encourage more consistent racing throughout the season. But Busch isn't buying it. He lived through the original chase format and knows from experience that changing the point system doesn't change driving habits. Formats can change overnight. Driver behavior and racing culture take much longer to shift, if they change at all. So when Tony Stewart climbs into that Cowlick Racing number 25 Ram truck at Daytona in February, he's stepping into a very different NASCAR than the one he remembers. At 54 years old, Stewart brings legendary skill and decades of experience. He hasn't been completely away from racing, maintaining his involvement through NHRA drag racing and team ownership. Kyle Busch's warning to Tony Stewart isn't meant to discourage the legend from competing. It's an honest assessment from someone who races in these series regularly and sees the reality of what NASCAR has become. The sport has changed, the drivers have changed, the culture has changed, and anyone stepping back into it after years away needs to understand exactly what they're getting into. That's the reality check NASCAR needs to hear, whether people want to accept it or not.